Okay, so today, let's turn that off actually. Today we're going to begin reading the book of Job. And I did a couple videos a day or two ago now about setting up the book of Job. And so I'm going to begin actually reading it today. One more thing I do want to say before I get started. I mentioned this in one of my previous two videos about this, but I don't know if I made the point as clearly as I wanted to. Is that the book of Job is poetry. It's a discourse. Really, we could think of it almost like a play. I don't think it's really meant to be read as a play, but it can be. You can think of it as a play. It might be, your best. It could be that your most faithful, accurate reading of the book. I'm sorry, there's a cat like right here, so I just have to. Okay, here she comes. Yeah. Hey. Yeah, you stay right here. Look at the camera, cat. Look at the camera. That's right there. Look at that dot right there. Yeah. Anyway, all the trouble you caused me. Might as well mug for the camera, cat. You go over there. Anyway, what was I saying? Your best effort, your best bet at faithfully reenacting the original reading of Job may be to have different people read out the different parts. The book doesn't necessarily say that, but I'm just please, yeah, go over there. Okay, anyway, but okay, so the point, and I've already said all that, but the point I want to emphasize today is that there's going to be a lot of we can't focus too much on any one detail within the book of Job. Okay, there are going to be a lot of sentences and a lot of sayings as these characters talk to each other that, taken by themselves, are going to paint a very inaccurate picture of Scripture. Okay, as I said earlier, Job is a big picture book. And so we really shouldn't get too fussed over the details. Okay, and I'll talk about it as we go, but the characters are going to say things that are by themselves taken just kind of, the characters just say it, we just kind of take it for granted they're talking about something that they should know about, but I can't. Hey. But we should be hesitant about taking any one of these sayings or any one of these teachings or any one of these verses too seriously. Okay, yeah, keep the big picture in mind. And remember, this is poetry. This is going to be filled with hyperbolic language. And another thing to consider as far as, no, can't have that. Okay, as far as Job goes, no. Why you just, okay, yeah, you go up there. Cats. It's constantly having to deal with cats. Another thing as far as the book of Job goes is these were not Israelites. Okay? Now the writer of the book, the one who recorded it for us, I believe is an Israelite. Whoever that person was and whenever he may have lived. But Job and the other characters in the book are not Israelites. There is a guy who comes along later on named Elihu who has a closer sounding Hebrew name. But even he is explicitly identified as a Buzite and not an Israelite. So Job and his friends, and Job and Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar and later on even Elihu, none of them are Israelites. And so it's possible that they don't have a full understanding of the Israelite God. In fact, in the actual original dialogue, the three antagonists, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, from what I remember reading, because remember I don't actually read Hebrew, do not use the covenantal name of God, Yahweh. I think Job does once or twice, But that name of Israel's God, that covenantal Israelite name, Yahweh, the name of the Israelite God, is basically only spoken by the narrator in the non-dialogue parts of the book. So it could be that they just didn't have a great understanding at this point in time of the Israelite God. And we are going to read several things in this book that speak to a worldview of a creation mythology that does not match up with Genesis 1. All right, I mentioned before how Genesis 1 itself is not even to be taken as a complete account of creation, because there are other accounts of creation in the Old Testament that have information in them that are not recorded in Genesis 1. And there are glimpses of creation in Job that do not match what we read in Genesis 1. So, now if that causes a problem for you, which it might for some people, just keep in mind that Job and his friends were not Israelites and therefore may not have had a full understanding of the Israelite God like, say, Moses did or something along those lines. But one way or another, it is important to remember that this overall story. I believe that Job lived and that these events did happen, but I don't believe that the book of Job contains the literal retelling of the story of Job. I believe this material was arranged by a Hebrew author at some point after the events happened, and was done so for the sake of telling a story and making a point. Remember, this book is not included in the historical narratives of the Jewish Old Testament, the Jewish Bible. It's included in the writing section. So this story is told is in the wisdom section. So this story is not told necessarily. It's not included here to give us a literal retelling of what happened to Job, as much as it is to provide us an insight into wisdom through this example, through this story. Okay, so here we go. Now, I believe the beginning of the book of Job is probably the part that most people are familiar with. I believe that most people who claim to read the book of Job probably only read the beginning and end and don't read the long, winding dialogue section in the middle. So this section here is probably the part that most people are most familiar with. We're going to go ahead and read it anyway, of course. Yeah, let's get started in the video.